Okay, welcome to chapter 14. So, content learning differences, what to expect. So, students struggle with understanding incoming information, receptive language difficulties, reading comprehension, and I would also say reading fluency as well. That's a huge thing because how much time we have to process information is not that long, especially in the upper grades. Organization, we all know that's a huge struggle. Long-term and short-term memory, poor spelling and handwriting skills, distractibility, and maybe some of that hyperactivity, essential skills like note-taking and studying, and just those general how to be a student skill, test-taking skills, those types of things. Instructional decisions. Understand the curriculum, the standards, how they're delivered, accommodations and adaptations, structure routines. Those routines really help. We've talked about clear expectations, but having routines and for students to know what to expect, that can be really key and reduce anxiety for a lot of students. Work collaboratively, co-teach material to students, emphasize individual strength. In terms of co-teaching, we've really seen that when we can get special education teachers and general education teachers to work together, oftentimes the special education teachers will come in and teach things like note-taking skills, provide accommodations to the whole class. And I was at a high school that started doing this in algebra and the geometry classes because those were key for the special ed students. But then it turned out that a lot of the skills that they were teaching, particularly those how to be a student skills, benefited a lot of the gen ed kids, and the grades of all of those students went up. When homework was more structured, when writing down homework was more structured, when how to take notes, how to study, all of those things were gone over explicitly with students. It helped a lot of our students out. Of course, this was in a more low SES background school, and so some of those how to be a student skills, some of our students get from their parents, and some of our students are not going to get those from our parents, so we need to make sure we're teaching them. Emphasize individual strength. One thing that we'll often talk about with struggling learners, because they have all these areas where they're struggling, is that we can give them what we might call like an island of excellence. If they have a special interest area, they can be known as the go-to person in that area, and you can help them develop this area that they're known for and they're valued for, and that can really help them out. I think about self-esteem as being a stool, and we all do best when we have multiple legs to rest our self-esteem on. I know for me personally, sometimes some of our legs get knocked out of us, right? Like maybe I just have I go and I'm just not clicking one day when I teach my class, right? I don't know what's going on. I'm fumbling over my words, or I thought this, that like this is going to be the best activity ever and it doesn't work, right? And so I can have this kind of blow to I'm good at my job. And if I have other legs, such as, well, I'm a good basketball player to hold me up, then I feel like we can rebound and be more resilient. And for our students who are getting the message of you're not doing well enough in all of these areas, to have an area that they're getting the message of you're exceeding can be crucial for them. One thing we often don't talk about is that there's a huge emotional overlay to having any kind of disability or any kind of struggle. And if we're not talking about that emotional overlay and helping students address that, then we're missing a key piece. When we talk about students dropping out of high school and those types of things, a lot of times what we've missed is the emotional overlay to their struggles, and we didn't help them have coping strategies. They felt like it was hopeless. They had no way of graduating. They didn't feel like they had value or worth. And so we did not do a good enough job of helping booster them and addressing the emotional issues that come with struggling. It's not easy to be retained and watch everybody else go on. It's not easy to watch your younger sister outperform you. Those are hard things that if we're not helping students with, and if they don't have the coping skills to deal with, then they will cope in ways that are counterproductive often. Okay, models and approaches for inclusive content area instruction. We've talked about universal design for learning, make instruction accessible for all students, use graphic organizers or advanced graphic organizers, guided notes. Again, if there are things that are issues for a good chunk of your class, then that means it's not an individual problem. That means that it's a system problem and should be addressed well. So if you get homework back and you only get 70%, only 70% of the students return the homework and 30% don't, so a third of your class is not turning in their homework regularly, then that's something to reflect on and figure out how, what can you do to help? Because this is not an individual problem at this point. There's something going on that is a barrier to enough students that something has to change. And it's not changing, oh, I need to go talk to Bobby about this. It's, I need to make sure that I'm making this more accessible to all of my students. Direct instruction, demonstration, guided practice, independent practice. We all know that. I think one of the big things here is practice, 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 practice till mastery. Make sure they get it before they move on. Models and approaches for inclusive content area instruction, guided discovery learning, teaches students to be independent problem solvers, learn generic steps for scientific inquiry, learn generic steps for logical thinking that, again, can be applied in many ways, cooperative learning, jigsaw, student teams, and achievement divisions. And this is where, when we talk about differentiation, if we're going to do these divisions and these cooperative learning aspects, really thinking about your struggling readers, what are their strengths and how can they capitalize on those in this setting? And what can we do about that? And I was actually, this is just kind of reminding me of a situation where there's a student with cerebral palsy at one of the schools that I work in. And so his mouth just, the muscles just won't do what he wants them to. So his verbal expression is very limited. And so they had to do a presentation in class. And he used an avatar to do the presentation. There were some technology issues. But the other thing is, this was at the elementary level. And what wasn't done well was, when the presentation first started, was explaining how the avatar was going to be, that it wasn't going to be his real voice. It was going to be somebody different. And so when we talk about cooperative learning, I think one aspect that sometimes we forget is that we focus on making sure we've got the support for our student, but we also need to make sure that we are giving that support to the other students about how to best work with them. So especially our students with significant needs and those types of things. If I'm a third grader, I may have never worked with somebody who's hard of hearing before. And if somebody doesn't give me explicit direction in, here's how you work with somebody who's hard of hearing, or here's how you work with somebody who has an interpreter. You don't talk to the interpreter, you talk to the person. Those kind of rules. A lot of students might not know that. So another part to facilitating this cooperative learning is making sure that we're letting all of the students know how to best work with some of our diverse learners. Models and approaches for inclusive content area instruction, learning strategies, how to teach strategy. I like this list because it shows how complicated teaching really is. There's this article that I read in graduate school called Teaching Reading is Rocket Science, and I think that is such a great title, because what we're trying to do is terribly complex. And I think the second we try to pretend it's not as complex as it is, that's when we get in trouble. So the how to teach strategy: 1, teacher presents and obtains student commitment to learn. Teacher describes new strategy. Teacher models the new strategy. Teacher and student verbally rehearse strategy steps. Student practices on controlled materials. Student practices on grade-appropriate classroom materials. Teacher post-tests to obtain student commitment to generalize, student generalizes. The one thing I also like about this list is it starts with this very first one, which talks about the pretest, but also gets the student's commitment to learn. And we often forget that the question of why do we have to learn this is actually an important question, and that people, both children and adults, learn things faster that have direct utility. So, and that's always true. I will learn things faster if I need it for tomorrow than I will if it's like, oh, here's something that maybe you might use, or there's no explanation about why it's important. So getting that student commitment to learn from the beginning can be really important. Models and approaches for inclusive content area instruction, content enhancement, redesign instruction and materials. You know, one thing that you can definitely do, I was working at a high school where we would have what we would call accommodation parties. If you throw the word party in there and you bring pizza, it's always much better. And this is where we'd have people come together to brainstorm, particularly those major assignments that they had within their courses, about how to, redesign them so that they had levels, so that they could have, here's a version of the assignment that's more scaffolded and working up. And so redesigning some of those things can be challenging. Having that collaboration, having that brainstorming. Okay, we're going to do a unit on the Lord of the Flies. How do we make this accessible? How do we challenge our tag kids? How do we do all of these things? What do we need to redesign? What assistive technology can we use? What can we incorporate to make it more accessible? And then routines. Again, once students know how to do something and how to do it well, if they always churn in work at the same place, it's a lot less confusing. Their cognitive energy, the beauty about routines and habits are that then your cognitive energy can be used elsewhere. So if you can really help them nail those routines down, then they can use all their cognitive energy not trying to figure out what's going on or where to turn something in, but on the content. Reading, background knowledge is key. Being able to kind of fill that in as much as possible, even quickly, showing pictures of things that are described. If a student's never been to the ocean, what are we even talking about here? Picture walks, think alouds, all of those types of things to kind of really bring those what's going on to life for the student, and to be explicit about, if I come to a word I don't know, what do I do about that? And do I just go, oh, there's a word I don't know? But if you can think about the strategies and how you use context clues and how you read and reread for information, that can be really helpful. Note-taking is a big one that's often required of students in schools. This one can be difficult for a lot of students. It can be difficult if you have trouble writing. It can be difficult if a student has, for example, a phonological processing or receptive language disorder, those types of things. Techniques that facilitate note-taking really help. If you provide a structured note-taking packet, that can really help. Directly teach how to take notes. This is, again, not something that we're born with. We don't come out, knowing how to curl our toes and turn towards sound and how to take notes. So we really need to talk about, there's a huge level of mega, cognition that goes into taking notes. What's important? What do I write down? What's not important? What don't I write down? How do I summarize vast amounts of information into a note so that I can take it later? Note-taking is complex. The earlier in their careers that they learn it, the more often you practice, the more often you model. Like, this is what I think is important in this chapter, and this is what I would have written down, really helps. And again, having structured note-taking versus just take notes on a blank sheet of paper. Again, that blank sheet of paper where students don't even know where to start can be very daunting. Models and approaches for inclusive content area instruction, test taking, provide accommodations, directly teach test taking techniques. Now again, you don't want this to get in the way of content, But a little bit of time to teach students about the best way to take tests can be really valuable to them and in their lives, so they can take the driver's ed test, all of those types of things, and get their driver's license. So this knowing how to take tests is not a trivial thing. I'm actually right now, this last year, I've taken several tests. I took the school psychology test because I'm trying to get my national school psychology license. I had to take the National Board Certified Counselors exam, and I'm currently studying for the GRE. So, and these tests decide whether or not you go through and you get a graduate degree in something, and then you have to take a test in, in different areas and in different things in order. If I didn't pass the counseling test, I don't get to be a counselor. That's how significant these tests are and potentially can be to our lives. So it doesn't matter if I spent $50,000 for the degree. I still wouldn't be able to earn an income based off of that if I can't pass the test. Employ a comprehensive test-taking strategy with students. Time and assignment management. This is huge. It's a huge skill. Teaching students how to break up big tasks into little tasks so that they're manageable. How to prioritize assignments. What assignments do you start with first? What do you get out of the way? Not all assignments are equal, right? Not all of them have the same weight. There's also students understanding the way grades work and how detrimental a 0 is, and that a 50 is so much better than a 0, and how it factors into weights, into grades and how things are weighted. So if they can get anything in, even if they don't understand, even helping students understand the perspective of teachers, and that if you give a try on something, even if it's not done correctly, that gets you so much more than if you look at something. There are times that you'll have students that'll look at something and they'll spend 15, 20, half an hour trying to figure it out. They won't get it, and what do? They toss it in the trash. But the difference would be if they looked at it and wrote some notes about what they didn't understand, or tried to attempt the few things they could, and they turned that in, that teacher would be so much more willing to work with them. And often students don't understand that, and they have difficulty advocating for themselves. They have difficulty reaching out, and just how valuable their understanding of that is. Planners, agenda books, helping students know what they need to take home at night in order to be successful. You might need your science textbook at home tonight to do your homework, so that has to get in your backpack, those types of things. And again, direct instruction in time management, in assignment management, in things like, okay, you have this essay to write. How do we break that down into meaningful chunks? Let's break it down into, it's due in 3 weeks. What do you do tonight? What do you do tomorrow? Those types of things. Often students need direct instruction in that. Okay. Pause and reflect. Think back to a situation where you were unable to perform a skill, complete a task, or engage in an activity to your or others' satisfaction. Describe your frustrations and identify several of the feelings you experienced in relation to your inability to adequately meet the requirements. What could have been done to help you? Describe the feelings you experience when getting ready to take a big test. How can having a test-taking strategy reduce nervousness and anxiety about facilitating clear thinking? I think the other thing to put on here is that when we talk about test-taking strategies, we should also be talking about test studying strategies and the things to do beforehand. So not just when I have it in front of me, what do I need to do, but also what do I need to be doing before to study effectively. Content area instruction for students with severe disabilities, universal design for instruction. Expectations should be true to grade level content. Collaboration is essential. Redesign the curriculum. Again, we talked about curriculum, instructional delivery and organization, materials, assessment. All of those things may be adapted for students with more significant disabilities. So how things are assessed, what materials are used, assistive technology cannot be understated in its importance and the access it can give to students. But there's lots of things that you may need to change. When you start changing the curriculum or what is expected, that's when you go into modifications. We've talked about accommodations and modifications. Sometimes when you're altering the curriculum, which you may need to do, that's when you've gone into modifications. Okay. Secondary content area instruction, putting it all together. Content area instruction in inclusive settings is a team effort. Definitely rely on your team, especially for students with more significant disabilities. The OT would probably love to help you figure out how to make handwriting or how to make some of those things more accessible in your classroom. Ask them. They'd probably be excited that you did. The primary role of the content area specialist is to select carefully the subject matter. So when we talk about co-teaching, oftentimes the content area specialist or the gen ed teacher is giving that rich content background and all of their knowledge of the content, all of their knowledge of Algebra 2, what needs to be taught in Algebra 2. And then it can be supplemented with a lot of the other things that we've been talking about. When presented well, content area subject matter is interesting, engaging, and motivating. I mean, like these things, the people spend their whole lives studying them because they are interesting. History can either be dull or it can be fascinating. It's better than any soap opera anybody's ever come up with, some of the things that have happened in history. Methods that support and enhance accessibility, that's huge, and that goes back to that collaboration. Talk to your assistive technology specialist, talk to the special ed teacher, all of those things. Like, how can you make this more accessible? And a lot of times when you make it more accessible for one group, it turns out that accessibility benefits all. Remember that the effective elements of teaching when providing special ed supports. So again, really good teaching is good teaching. Oftentimes, effective teaching is good, effective teaching for all students. When we look at what works really well for English language learners, what works really well for students with special needs, what helps accelerate general ed students, a lot of times we find it's the same strategies, which is fantastic because it does reduce the load there. And so oftentimes good teaching is good teaching, and it's good teaching for everyone. Pause and reflect. Content area reading, note-taking, test-taking, and time management are identified in the chapter as 4 important survival strategies for the acquisition of content area knowledge. How would you rank the 4 content survival strategies in priority order? What would be the rationale for each ranking? Too many students do not make full use of planners because they have difficulty recording assignments to complete tasks. Detailing the requirements of multi-component tasks, and estimating the amount of time needed to complete tasks. How can technology assist students in making better use of planners? What technology devices are you aware of that could be useful as a planning resource for this group of students? Research has shown that students with severe disabilities can benefit from access to the general education curriculum and strategically enhance content instruction. Students with severe disabilities could also benefit from a functional curriculum that builds the skills for independent living. Do you believe that students with severe disabilities would receive greater benefit from a functional curriculum rather than from content area instruction? Why or why not? Rogan describes learning strategies as a broad array of techniques that help students access and use higher order secondary content knowledge. Select a content area subject discussed in the chapter and create a strategy to assist students in organizing, storing, and using elements of the subject. What are the challenges in teaching students to use learning strategies? Okay, thank you.